Hi, this is Joshua Kulp. We are doing the video for Avodah Zarah, Daf Nun Bet. And I wanted to go over the Mishnah, or really the Braita, that's sort of an expansion of the Mishnah that continues to be discussion at the beginning of this Daf. It's good to remember this Braita. There's a machloket, a dispute between Rabbi Yishmael and Rabbi Akiva. When do idols become prohibited? So according to Rabbi Yishmael, when an idolater makes an idol, it is prohibited immediately. The reasoning, the logic seems to be, look, an idolater is making an idol. It's already part of the world of idolatry. Nothing needs to happen to it for it to become prohibited, for it to enter, if you will, into the world of idolatry, and therefore it is prohibited immediately. On the other hand, if an Israelite makes an idol, it's only prohibited once he begins to worship it. I think the thinking goes, look, when an Israelite makes an idol, the Israelite isn't inherently part of the world of idolatry, and therefore, how does that idol become part of an idolatrous object? Somebody actually has to worship it. Rabbi Akiva says the exact opposite. An idolater's idol is prohibited only once it's worshipped, but in Israelites is prohibited immediately. So it seems to be the thinking here is like this. An idol made by an idolater, well, no sin has been done with it just by making it, because idolaters worship idols. While we might say that Noahides are not supposed to worship idols, we don't take that quite as seriously as thinking about our own prohibition for worshiping idols. And therefore, in a sense, no Jewish sin, let's put it that way. No Israelite sin has been performed with it. So it only becomes prohibited once it's worshipped and fully entered into the world of idolatry. Just making it really isn't enough. But an Israelite shouldn't be anywhere near any of these things. And therefore, when an Israelite makes an idol, it immediately becomes prohibited, even if he hasn't worshipped it yet. So anyway, that's the machloket that the Gemara is talking about. The Gemara looks for logic, looks for sources, looks for verses, for finding the why Rabbi Yishmael and Rabbi Akiva dispute this subject. But I don't want to get into that now. You'll learn that as you learn the daf. There's another issue that comes up, and that's what requires what they call geniza, by geniza, which is a little bit like the word geniza that you're familiar with. It's the same word, but the idea is here that things that cannot be used and could ensnare people by being tempting for them to use, even in a mundane way, have to be set aside so that no one will use them. So since an Israelite's idol, one that at least certainly he worshipped, can never be put to use. So if an Israelite worships a stone or some kind of idol, it can't be broken down and the stones used or the metal used. The material in that idol is prohibited forever, to make sure that other people don't make any kind of use, even mundane use, out of that idol. It has to be put away forever. This is different from an idol made by an idolater, which can be annulled, at least by the idolater. So that's why there's some things that are more strict when it comes to an Israelite's idol, because there's no way of annulling it. So that's the first half of this daf. The second half is 3 theoretical questions, which you'll see in my commentary. I really enjoy this kind of stuff because they're very intellectual kinds of like trying to figure out different sides. I think it's the way that the rabbis talk, in a sense, philosophy, or at least philosophy of Avodah Zarah, legal philosophy of Avodah Zarah, of idolatry. So the first thing is, when somebody fixes a vessel to be used in the service of idolatry, does that vessel become prohibited immediately, or is it prohibited only once it's used? Okay, and you'll see that question as it comes up. The second question is about offerings made of food for an idolatrous service. They are both prohibited and they convey impurity. So the question is, it can be annulled, right? An offering can't be annulled. But if the idol is annulled, does the food lose its impurity? Okay, it's an in question that's interesting, because generally speaking, when it comes to the regular rules of impurity, once food is impure, it can't be purified with a mikvah, unlike, let's say, a vessel that can be purified either by a mikvah or in other types of ways that things can be purified. The third question is a very important historical question, interesting historical question. It's about the Temple of Onias. The Temple of Onias was a temple built during the time when the Second Temple was still standing. It was built in Egypt and was meant to be either, you could either look at it as a supplement for Jews from Egypt, and there were quite a substantial number of Jews in Egypt during that time period, either as a supplement to the temple or as a replacement, in a sense, for the temple. You can imagine that the people in the temple in Jerusalem didn't really like a rivalry, and there are quite a few polemics. For instance, I believe the second book of Maccabees has some polemics against this temple. Josephus mentions it. There's a few probably letters that mention it. It's a little unclear exactly what the nature is of this temple, but the rabbis talk about it on occasion and take various attitudes to it, ranging from it's an idolatrous temple that should be completely considered like idolatry, and the other range of the view is, while it's prohibited and unacceptable, it wasn't idolatry, meaning the intention was probably good, even though the temple should have been built. So the question is, can vessels that were once used in the Temple of Onias, can they be used in the temple in Jerusalem? And it's sort of like questioning in a sense, is the Temple of Onias really an idolatrous temple, or should we not consider it idolatrous? It's an interesting page, and I hope you enjoy it.